There we go. That was very loud. That's a nice announcement. There we go. So welcome to Into Engineering's next in the episode of Re-Engineering Pride. This session we're focusing on marking IDAHOBIT, and we will be looking at recent developments in anti-LGBTQ sentiments that manifested across the UK and overseas, and exploring how LGBT communities and our allies can challenge this discrimination. Yep. Bit of
For
an
anybody
introduction.
who's on the, if anybody who hasn't been to one of these before, the chat function is disabled, but you can ask questions on the Q&A section, particularly with what we're talking through, and you'll see why some of the things that have been happening on LinkedIn and other platforms like that. We have disabled the chat.
Thanks, Boggy. Maybe just an introduction to ourselves. So we're both the co-chairs of Into Engineering. So if you haven't joined us before, then welcome. Hopefully you'll enjoy today's webinar and find it educational. And yeah, as Boggy said, please do interact with us in the Q&A. That's really appreciated. We're going to be talking about the ILGA's scores that have recently been published for 2025, looking at global picture of LGBT trends in terms of legislation and changes within politics and sort of global sentiment. Looking at a few hate crime statistics. Then Poggy is going to be talking about the impacts on the trans community and relevance to our sector of engineering, and then sort of flicking background to into engineering, what we do and how we can support each other in quite troubling times. Potentially you might have been aware the IGLA's sort of ranking. So this covers lots and lots of different things, looking at how a country ranks in its support and legislation around the LGBT community. The UK has fallen this year to 22nd place, which quite staggeringly, only 10 years ago, we were at the forefront and in first place. And Poggy has created this excellent graphic, which sort of just demonstrates our fall from what would have been a European leader in terms of LGBT rights and sentiment within the population to now quite drastically falling over the last few years, right down into 22nd place, which is pretty troublesome and very demoralizing, considering the hard work that people have done to have had such early forward thinking and protection of our rights, and that was reflected by the thoughts and feedback within society. But it just shows how much external and internal factors can have an impact on day-to-day life with people of the LGBT community. So yeah, now we're just going to take sort of a journey through a few things that I thought were worth drawing attention to, both on a European and global scale. Within Europe, these are facts from the IGLA. In 2025, 7 countries in Europe introduced LGBT propaganda laws and enacted or proposed criminalising visibility and restrictions around discussion of LGBT issues within society. They also, in parallel, introduced foreign agent laws targeting NGOs and these have been either proposed or introduced in Bulgaria, Georgia, Hungary, Montenegro, which are forcing LGBT organizations trying to work in their countries, basically restricting the work that they can do. These laws have increasingly leveraged within the education sectors, restricting or entirely preventing the inclusion of LGBT issues within curricula, awareness raising initiatives, and generally supporting LGBT youth. So you can see sort of the damage and impact that that would have. A lot of us that grew up around the time of Section 28 know how sort of divisive and impactful that that can be. In addition, there's been many attempts to introduce legislation excluding LGBT topics from sex education, and these have been recorded as proposed in Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Norway, Romania, Russia, and Slovakia. Now, a few on that list might be quite surprising to some, but it's just really mindful around how things can change quite quickly in a countries that you might consider quite forward thinking with their rights for the LGBT community. It only takes one piece of legislation that can really have such a massive impact. The consequences of these being introduced results in fear mongering being used to justify restrictions on trans healthcare in countries such as Georgia, Hungary, Ireland, Romania, and the UK, which Poggy will be talking about later. As governments intensify their crackdown, LGBT individuals are being forced to flee, yet many European countries, including Austria, Belgium, and Ireland, are denying asylum to those claiming arbitrary grounds, with applicants rejected for just not seeming gay enough, which is something that we hear a lot about in the news and is becoming increasingly problematic, given that people are looking for a safer place to live. If we now move to a global picture. So a slight positive. So there are changes around the globe that are sort of positive, but there are also lots of negatives. Last year, progress was made through marriage equality in Greece and Thailand, and the decriminalisation of gay sex in Namibia and the Dominican Republic. And self-identification laws were implemented within Germany and Ecuador, which will ease the process for changing legal gender. However, other countries experience considerable setbacks, with anti-LGBT legislation passing in Ghana, Mali, Georgia, and Bulgaria. And the impact of this is visible, with a grim threshold crossed in 2024 when the number of trans and gender diverse people who had been murdered surpassed 5,000 for the first time since rights groups began monitoring in 2008. Recently, Uganda and Ghana have enacted severe anti-LGBT laws, and Ghana's new president signed a bill just this month, which was passed unanimously, further criminalising LGBT activity and support for the community. A similar bill is being discussed in the Liberian Parliament at the moment, and could introduce life imprisonment for homosexual activity. If you flick to the next, perfect. In 1991, 5 countries had an explicit ban on same-sex marriages, but by 2019, based on available data, up to 37 countries had such a ban. And then recently in the news, where sort of progress had been made previously in 2018, where a landmark ruling decriminalised the consensual same-sex relationships, which was a legacy of the colonial law in the country, has since been repealed this year, reinstating criminal convictions and up to 25 years in prison. As is more commonly sort of heard about in the news, in the US, Trump has pledged to roll back a whole host of LGBT rights, including banning gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth and education in schools. Many countries with anti-LGBT laws, including those with the death penalty, it should be highlighted, present lots of problems for people traveling, especially for work reasons, or those living and working in the country. And sort of bringing this back around to an engineering conversation, many large companies who have international bases operate offices within such nations, and there are increasing discussions about how this is managed, with many looking to adopt sort of embassy models. And we
Even I think it's important to recognise how this impacts us as engineers, as Fiona was saying, with companies that work in various different countries. The three companies I worked for when I was in automation engineering were global companies and had offices all around the world, and there were events and offices and certain things that I was restricted in doing for the fear of my safety. But even in everyday life, in personal life, things that people outside of the LGBTQ plus community wouldn't think about is, for example, where we go on holiday. I got married 3 years ago, and choosing somewhere where we could go safely on honeymoon was actually quite problematic. One, because we're a same-sex couple, but also because we're an interracial same-sex couple, which made it even more difficult. It really can have an impact, and the situation at the moment with the increase in anti-LGBTQ plus law in various different countries is making the world feel a lot more unsafe.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we think all the time, myself and my girlfriend, around where we want to go on holiday. And I think even like 5 or 6 years ago, we would be comfortable traveling to Poland, whereas now, even though certain restrictions, it just different European countries, it changes all the time. And I don't think it's on a lot of people's radar when they don't have to consider it for themselves in terms of reading the news, reading political changes within different nations. And again, I mean, work relatively recently asked me if I would attend a site visit in Morocco, and I had to point out to them that I'm illegal there. So there would have to be quite a substantial risk assessment if they really wanted to request that I travel there, and if I would be comfortable to do so. And it hadn't even occurred to them that there might be a sort of a travel restriction or an issue there. And it also raises the question around, I'm now openly out at work, but how does this navigated within line management and HR if someone isn't out? And are we putting people in challenging situations to try and navigate if we're not cognizant of risk factors around international travel? So yeah, I think it's really important to be aware and to be thinking about.
There's also the democratic and diplomatic side with um, a big one being the push that the Trump administration is having on DEI, not just domestically but internationally as well. A really clear example of this that we've seen within engineering is Rolls-Royce rolling back their ERGs that they've had for a number of years. Inter Engineering was actually present at Rolls-Royce's LGBT network inaugural the network's inaugural meeting back in 2015, 2014, something like that. It was around 10 years ago, and that was a decision based on, understandably, Rolls-Royce has a lot of contracts with the US government, but they have something like 13% of their workforce in the US, and a decision could have been made to make those changes just to the US, but for ease, they've rolled them out throughout the whole of the world, and that means that even though it's a UK company, they're rolling back their diversity inclusion initiatives based on what's happening in the US. It really does have an impact all over the world.
If it also it has a impact over the world, but it very much has an impact on our doorstep and our daily lives. And yeah, now I'm going to just share a few statistics around reported hate crime over the last few years. There's quite a complicated picture when considering hate crime reporting. Firstly, around the statistics of how it's captured within the police and how it's recorded, and therefore the accuracy of the data reporting and the categorization of the crimes. So just to flag that, and then also to flag that people's comfort or willingness to report certain hate crimes is reliant on their confidence in justice being sought. So a lot of the statistics might not be, and probably aren't, reflective of the actual hate crime statistics that are occurring. But yeah, just to draw attention to the fact that in the past 5 years, hate crimes towards the LGBT community are up nearly 200%. However, since 2023, there has been a drop in reported hate crime. However, as I've sort of just mentioned, this comes against a backdrop of the UK government drawing back its support for trans people and the growth of sort of divisive and rhetoric around the trans community, as well as the wider LGBT community, could well have an influence on the sort of reported statistics of this, with official numbers not really sort of painting the full picture. There's also an intersectional aspect to this around if an intersectional sort of hate crime has occurred, whereas it's maybe a disabled person who's also LGBT, it might just get recorded under one and then not the other. So there might be a sort of masking of different hate crimes, especially around sort of race or ethnicity as well. Um, and if you look deeper into the data, you can see reporting trends of that. So it does depend on how the crime is categorized. Stonewall research shows that less than half LGBT people feel safe holding their partner's hand in public. And according to a survey by Gallup, only 1 in 8 people reported their experiences of hate crime to the police. So it's just it's really important to consider that the statistics here are definitely not reflective of how high hate crime is in the UK. Also, given the majority of reported hate crimes for the LGBT community fall under the categories of stalking and harassment, public order offences, and violence against another person without injury, they're probably the crimes that have the lowest conviction rate as well. So if you consider someone's perception of justice being that the criminal is held accountable, if on their first reporting they haven't found justice in that sense, then they're much more unlikely to report it a second time round, given the perception of poor prosecution rates. So it's really important, and also the fact that 67% of trans and non-binary people said they'd never reported the hate crimes that they've been a victim of. Is really important, and I've potentially now not got a link, but I've got some lots of resources around how you can report hate crime, and we'll probably just post them in the link. But yeah, I found an app you can use that might save. It allows the reporting to be easier and allows the report to go to someone that's going to be receptive and understanding around the nature of the crime that you're reporting, which I think is really important. My girlfriend previously worked answering 999 calls, and for the police, I should add. And I think it really raised awareness to me of how education of the people taking the calls is so vitally important to understand, so that they can understand how this has impacted someone and how to appropriately deal with the report. She did a lot of work with her colleagues to raise awareness around just simple things like correct pronouns, and the fact that you need to be really mindful that people might not be out when reporting things. So to if it's someone that's under 18 reporting, then to just be really mindful that you're not then outing them to their parents when further handling the report, and the markers that you can use when inputting it onto police systems. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's sort of going on in the background, but yeah, worrying statistics given that It's up 200% in the last 5 years, and that's no surprise given the fall in the UK IGLL rankings and everything that we see in the media recently.
So we wanted to give some portion of today's webinar to the situation that we found ourselves in with regard to the trans community. There's been a lot of this discussed on LinkedIn and various other platforms elsewhere. One of the things that Fiona and I wanted to do this year with the Re-Engineering Pride series was to take a step back, really, in that last year we held these webinars once a month, and for each one we had panelists come in, and it was much more in depth in various different topics, whereas this year we wanted it to be more of covering not the basics, but being more mindful that not everybody has as in-depth a knowledge on these topics as we do. So for this part, I'm basically going to be talking through the basics of what is happening, where we are, and how we've got here. I'm not going to read out all of this, but what is on the screen is taken directly from the various acts and pieces of legislation I'm be talking through. So an important thing to start with is the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. Now, under this act, it was made available for trans people to legally change their sex. As you can see in section 9 of this, the reference of the Gender Recognition Act was that where a full gender recognition certificate is issued to a person, the person's gender becomes for all purposes the acquired gender, so that if the acquired gender is the male gender, the person's sex becomes that of man, and the same for a woman. So effectively, under this act, a person's sex in law could be changed for those people who had a gender recognition certificate. This was enacted back in 2004, and so since then, people have been able to, again, as the Act says, in all purposes, navigate the UK system, legal system, passports, driving licenses, birth certificates, forms, and services as their correct gender. In 2010, something we may be more familiar with, the Equality Act came out. Now, the Equality Act, as some of you may know, had various different protected characteristics, which includes sexual orientation, disability, and various other things, marital status, for example. The two important to this were gender reassignment and sex. Gender reassignment being a protected characteristic for those who have undergone or are in the process of reassigning their sex, and discrimination based on the characteristic of sex for people who have a particular protected characteristics of a man or a woman. Now, what's important about the Equality Act of 2010 is that the only definition it gives to man or woman are the ones that are at the bottom of the screen there. So a man means a male of any age, and a woman means a female of any age. Now, up until this year, that is what we had to go on in terms of law. So we had the Gender Recognition Act, which says in black and white that a person's gender becomes for all purposes the acquired gender. So the sex becomes that of a man or that of a woman. And we had the Equality Act, which says that sex is a protected characteristic, as is gender reassignment. If anybody has any questions about any of this as I'm going along, please just put them in the Q&A and I will answer them as and when I get around to them. So that is what we had. That's up until the Supreme Court ruling last month, however long ago it was. So the situation we are in now, firstly, the UK Supreme Court ruling. It was a very long document. It was 88 pages long. An important part that I've put here is that they say the definition of sex in the Equality Act of 2010 makes it clear that the concept of sex is binary. A person is either a woman or a man. Persons who share that protected characteristic for the purposes of the group-based rights and protections are persons of the same sex. Essentially, what it's saying here is that sex is biological. So it's making a distinction between what it refers to as biological sex and certificated sex. This term was new to me, certificated sex. I hadn't heard that said by anybody before. I think it's something that was introduced by this Supreme Court ruling. But there are other things that are important to remember with this ruling. If anybody has read this document in full, well done. I have. It's 88 pages long. Some important points to consider: in those 88 pages, intersex people are not mentioned once. There's no mention of them at all. And also the consultation that the UK Supreme Court did in the lead up to releasing this ruling was done without the input of any trans people or groups at all. Although it did allow inputs from institutions and networks like the LGBT Alliance and Sex Matters. So we have the UK Supreme Court ruling, which effectively said that sex is biological in terms of the Equality Acts of 2010 with regard to sex discrimination. Subsequently, the EHRC released some interim guidance. Something I am going to say at the top of this is the EHRC releases guidance. It is guidance, it's advice, it's not law, it's not statutory. So it's not something that you can quote as we absolutely have to do this. It's their interpretation of the ruling effectively, and it is interim guidance. But their guidance went a lot further than the UK Supreme Court ruling went. It wasn't just talking about the Equality Act of 2010 as the UK Supreme Court ruling was. It went a lot further and was talking about workplaces and services. It focused quite heavily on bathrooms, changing rooms, and other elements like that that are more commonly talked about in the mainstream media. And effectively said that trans women, which it refers to as biological men, should not be permitted to use women's facilities, and that trans men, which it refers to as biological women, should not be permitted to use men's facilities in workplaces or services that are open to the public. I will say here that the EHRC is being sued based on this. It has also decided to have a longer consultation period of, I believe, 6 weeks, which has just started this week, I believe. So if you have any feelings on this and want to input, then you can come and speak to Fiona or me afterwards, and we can point you in the right direction of how you might be able to do that. So this is the situation we're in, and this is why it can be quite confusing, because there are various elements to our statute, to our law, that seem to be very conflicting now. Some of these seem to be contradicting each other. What's important to remember is what the impact of this is on people. And to give 3 examples from news stories that have come out just within the past month. One that you may have seen more recently is that this is from the US, not the UK, but I do have UK examples as well. A story came out of Boston in that 2 lesbians, a couple, were kicked out of a hotel for being quote unquote a man. This was misreported to begin with. The company said that they were in the same cubicle together, which was not true. One of the women, and I will point out these were 2 cisgender women, but one of them happened to be quite masculine presenting, and so was assumed to be trans and was kicked out. This really is going to happen more and more. We are seeing more of this. I've got two more examples here, but the impact of this is not just on trans people, it's also on cis people, on the cisgender community. Any woman effectively who may be masculine presenting, women with POCS or any other condition, could be heavily impacted by this. And when you consider this in the UK in particular, there is currently no documents that distinguishes between what the UK Supreme Court and the HRC are now referring to as biological sex and certificated sex. If you consider two women, one who is cis, one who is trans, the trans woman having a gender recognition certificate, it's possible that all of their documents, passports, driving licenses, birth certificates will say female. So how can you police this? It's a really important question that really doesn't get talked about enough. If you're going to restrict single sex spaces purely based on biological sex, how exactly can you police that with the current situation of our documentation being that you can't distinguish between what they're calling biological sex and certificated sex? Another example from the UK, this didn't really make mainstream news, but did come up and it was widely shared on Facebook. Another cis woman who was using or trying to use the female toilets somewhere near London. I think it was some kind of fair or festival or something, posted again on Facebook that this is affecting her. And the third one, a trans man who claims that their gym asked, well, would ask what genitalia they had in order to determine what facilities they could use, what changing rooms, etc. This is the reality now. This is going to be happening more and more, and not just to the trans community, but to everybody else as well. Anything you'd like to say on this, Fiona?
No, just that it it increasingly has the opposite effect of what people probably intended it to have, with whatever intention that was, in that it's just policing women in terms of what defines a woman and what we should look like and act like and how we should present ourselves to be woman enough. It's just hugely frustrating and doesn't lead to me feeling any safer in any space, and a whole host less safe when I'm in spaces where you feel that you may be challenged to access spaces. It's just, yeah, it's just hugely frustrating, really. And that there was no consideration or consultation is probably one of the most infuriating things.
Something else to bear in mind is that a lot of this conversation is focused on trans women and trans women, people wanting trans women to use male bathrooms. But as the UK Supreme Court and the EHRC interim guidance said, trans men should, according to them, be using female bathrooms. And I think the majority of the population may not have known that they have met a trans man at one point. But it does add complications. It does add risk when potentially cis men could use that as an excuse to try and access those spaces as well, because a lot of trans men you pass very, very well as cis men do.
I think Kat, one of our colleagues, put so eloquently that women don't view public bathrooms as safe spaces regardless, and that to 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 say the whole of this and the stripping of such an important sector of our community's rights based on that narrative is, yeah, increasingly counterintuitive, and so many more effective things could be done to increase the safety of women. And yes, how many men could walk into our toilets now and have a very legitimate reason for justifying their presence there under this new act.
We've had a question from an anonymous attendee asking, as this is about re-engineering, when confronted with an issue on what bathroom to use, what would you recommend? Comply? A cis woman should not comply when asked to leave a woman's restroom. Question.
Um, I think personally it depends on the context. I don't know, Poggy, if you have any thoughts, but for me, safety first, and second, address the problem, address the situation in a way that you feel comfortable with. There's never an easy resolution to this. But yeah, it depends if it's in your daily workplace or somewhere you don't frequent very often. Uh, it depends if you know you've got an ally that you could raise this with. It depends if you know if your HR is going to be supportive. There's so many aspects to this where, yes, we should speak up for ourselves if you feel comfortable, but I think to other situations where I've experienced harassment or sexism, quite often I don't want to confront them in the immediate term because I don't feel comfortable, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't feel safe doing so. Um, and that, yeah, it depends on who's raised it, and if there's another mechanism where you can resolve it. I'd like to think most of us would be able to do something productive, even if that isn't really raising it in the immediate term, because things like this have a wider impact. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any other
Yeah,
thoughts.
I would agree. I think it's important in context, really. I mean, thinking two wildly different situations. One being in an office where you know where the facilities are. It's sort of somewhere where you are perhaps, well, maybe not anymore, but most of the time, if not, a big majority of the time, would be very different from a situation where you were on site. Now, I don't have lived experience of this, but I've worked predominantly on site for my career, and I am aware that accessing female bathrooms on site, particularly in construction or agriculture, is difficult enough as it is without adding additional complications of people trying to police those. So it really does become
Yeah,
a
there's
very
already
difficult
enough
situation.
policing of women's bathrooms with a male key holder, which you have to go and ask permission to seek the key of. So if you were then challenged as to why you were justified to get the key in the first place, then it just adds a whole nother level of gatekeeping, um, to something we should have free access to. But yeah, I think it very much depends on the context.
Yeah, definitely. And in those situations, that's where, and we'll come to this at the end, but that's where if you were to encounter something like that, come and speak to us. We can help go to whoever the right person is within that system, within that structure, to speak to them, to educate them, to try and drive some form of change or understanding.
I think potentially there might also be a huge miseducation piece around this because it is quite well, the EHSE guidance isn't very helpful towards this, but people may feel they're doing the right thing inadvertently because they're following guidance, if you see what I mean, and there is an opportunity there to perhaps educate. Um, some people just maybe aren't aware of the impacts, and that view these things around safety and believe they're really sort of following the right thing. So, yeah, into engineering can definitely help with um, sharing best practice and guidance around that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is particularly difficult given when I've just done what 10 minutes on the different guidance and stuff that has come out and laws and rules, and there is a lot that seems to contradict each other. So it is, yeah, as Fiona said, perfectly possible that somebody thinks they're completely doing the right thing, where it can be quite confusing. And the EHRC guidance is interim guidance. There will be another set of guidance to come after the current consultation period, and God knows what that's going to have in it. We've had something else come in. Fully agree, safety is first, but complying with whatever the local bully asks, whether it's right or legal, is so frustrating. it gives the bullet exactly what they're seeking. Your point about having an online speak up is very good and takes the heat off. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why there's importance around ERG networks and allyship as well. For example, I work in quite a small office, and there necessarily maybe isn't that much of a visible presence of ERGs. However, a company I work for has a wider network and potentially has better resources where you could sort of reach out and speak to someone that might be able to point someone in the right direction or assist, which takes the heat directly off you being visible as the person that it's never great to be the one that's always raising the problem. It's sort of much better to sometimes um, take the heat off, and if you have got someone that's particularly challenging, them being approached by a neutral party could well be a better tactic.
if this is something that you have encountered or that you think there's a good chance you may encounter, again, feel free to come and speak to Fiona or myself, or both of us, and we can see what we can do to to help. Sometimes education, proactive education, can make a big difference. In terms of relevance to engineering, construction, and manufacturing, we've gone um, through this as we've been going along, and I have shared these slides before on previous presentations that we've done. But just to draw attention to some statistics that aren't necessarily LGBTQ plus specific at first, but within our masculinity and engineering research that we have done, oh, sorry, um, we found that 80% of people experience some form of emotional or mental health issues. Um, we find that there is a big gap between how men and how women perceive engineering culture, with women seeing engineering as much more masculine than men do. Um, we saw an increase from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 people from 2019 to 2022 reporting that they had considered either self-harm or suicide at some point in their career. Um, and we see that very few people are comfortable talking about stress or depression with their employer. And actually, from the first to the second study that we did from 2019 to 2022, that figure didn't change. It's something that I found quite interesting, really, given that in between those two dates we had the global pandemic where talking about mental health issues became much more mainstream, and yet people's comfort with talking about those to their employer didn't change, actually. Um, Specifically with LGBTQ Q plus discrimination, from a few different surveys, we can see the levels of discrimination that people face um, within the workplace. And to give a kind of a benchmark, a report in 2018 by Stonewall showed that in non-engineering specific sectors, around 18% of respondents had said they had experienced discrimination based on their sexual orientation or gender identity within the past year. When we compare this with engineering sectors, the engineering sector in particular, some studies done by Mark McBride Wright showed that 20% of people had experienced discrimination and 40% of people had witnessed discrimination in the workplace. Those numbers stayed fairly consistent over the next, well, nearly decade, up until 2023, when the Royal Academy of Engineering did a similar survey showing 25% and 32% for those same questions there. And some research that I did 2 years ago, specifically within my discipline of engineering, which is automation engineering, showed that that figure was much higher. It was at 70, 71, nearly 72%. But this really can show that although engineering is higher than non-engineering across the board, some disciplines of engineering, some sectors of engineering can be much more discriminatory than others. And it can even come down to, as we were just talking about, to the size of company that you working for, an SME in the middle of the countryside will be a very different experience to working for a large company in London, for example. Well, we can actually split this down and look specifically at the trans community. So a study done by the CIPD in 2021 showed that, again, in non-engineering specific situations, 55% of trans respondents said that they had experienced conflicts in engineering. Sorry, not in engineering, in the workplace. Whereas in engineering, in the research that I did, that figure was 100%. And the context of this was before 2025. This was before the UK slid down to 22nd place in the ILGA Europe rankings. It was before the UK Supreme Court ruling. It was before the EHRC interim guidance. So all of this situation is having an effect, and these statistics will be vastly different now than what they would have been even 2 years ago. And again, the types of discrimination that are prevalent in engineering, I showed in the research that I did a couple of years ago, with 80% of respondents, so LGBTQIA plus engineers, saying that they had experienced some form of verbal abuse, nearly half some form of bullying or harassment, all the way down to stereotyping, physical abuse, transphobia, and even blackmail.
So now we just wanted to raise awareness really around what engineering does, and sort of talk through the support that it offers, especially in the context of today, and the current sort of challenges that we're experiencing. We organize various Pride events, which I'm sure you've seen throughout our LinkedIn posts, and on Circle. We obviously run these webinars, but we're there also if anyone wants to reach out with specific requests for either educational resources for their company, support with their employee resource groups. If you've sort of hit a bit of a blocker or a dead end, or not really sure how you can be most effective as part of an ERG, if you're getting any sort of rollback within your company with regards to employee resource groups or EDI, again, I'm sure we can assist you in conveying the importance of maintaining EDI and visibility of employee resource groups across the whole intersectional range of underrepresented groups within engineering. We're there for one-to-one support if anyone has anything that they would like to raise. We've both had our individual challenges within the workplace and outside of work. So, yep, happy to sort of have you reach out. And yeah, if anyone else wants to point colleagues in our direction, then we're all ears. I think we had a really good, almost informal drop-in session when the Supreme ruling came out, and yeah, I think that was really important, and I think potentially we'll look to organise more just spaces where people can communicate and raise any concerns. And big shout out to Circle as well, which is a growing network of LGBT engineers on the Incredible Engineers Circle network, and yeah, definitely offers an opportunity for people to connect and share experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to talk through some of the events we have upcoming, for anybody who is around the Midlands area, it's Birmingham Pride this Saturday. We do still have some places left, so if you wanted to join us for Birmingham Pride, then you can sign up on the website. We have Pride in London coming up on the 5th of July. In the run-up to Pride in London, we also have a free boat tour, which is being hosted by Thames Tideway, so the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which is now complete. So that's on Wednesday, the 25th of June, from 4 till 6. As I say, it's completely free. We are asking for a £1 deposit just to secure a place, but you'll get that back. But it's a free 2-hour boat tour. It's going to be around 120 people there, so it'll be great for networking. For anybody who hasn't joined Circle yet, you can join that via the website at equalengineers.com and visit the networks page and visit Interengineering. Interengineering is just one of 7 networks that we have talking about intersectionality. We have group networks for disability, neurodiversity. We have a men's group, a women's group, a menopause group, and REACH, which is race, ethnicity, and cultural heritage. We are also doing Manchester Pride and UK Black Pride later on in the year in August. We do these re-engineering Pride webinars every quarter. But as Fiona says, we're here to talk to. We're here to come and consult us if and where you need us. We have a stack of resources on our website. We did a few years ago. We did some video profiles of our membership. We have around 1,500 members informally. We don't have a formal membership list, but we do have around 1,500 in various different places and mailing lists and all sorts of stuff. But we did some video profiles of our members a few years ago with the Royal Academy of Engineering and Mott MacDonald, including trans members. I saw a question come through on that. So yes, we do have trans members, and we have video profiles of trans members on our website that you can go and see. We often do events with some of our sister networks, so Building Equality being one of them, the Proud Science Alliance being another, who also have out and proud trans representatives as well.
Yeah, I would also say that a lot of the webinars that we recorded last year have trans representation as well. So definitely worth checking those out if you're looking for other resources or things to share within networks. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a webinar on Trans Day visibility last year, specifically. So yeah, we did have that representation there. Any further questions? I saw a few come through at the end there. I've tried to weave them into what I was just talking about.
Also, I would say that they might have noticed online that we've been writing our own stories of experiences within engineering. If anyone else wants to share their experience or write their story, we're gratefully receiving content for the next chapters of our story. Especially if any trans people would like to come forward, then definitely would like to raise their profile.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a blog called My Pride Story in Engineering. Fiona and I have shared our experiences. Tyler, who's the co-chair of REACH, has shared his story as well. We have a couple more that are being written and edited at the moment, but we would like to post one of these every month if we can. So yeah, very much looking for submissions there.
Perfect.
We have another question, wondering how you navigate being LGBTQ plus and certain spaces, especially geographic, where there may be a lot of work, but such identities can be quite detrimental for personal safety.
Yeah, I don't have I think I'm quite privileged, but I have always opted to work for companies that sorry, it's my internet. Okay. Yeah, don't necessarily have too much of an active profile in certain countries which have are not supportive of LGBT rights. I have been approached by multiple companies that are requiring my presence in the likes of, there's an exciting opportunity in Oman, etc., which isn't perhaps as exciting as I think it might sound to them. I'm sure there is fascinating geology and geotechnics, and it would be excellent opportunity for someone, but perhaps not me. Um, so yeah, I've potentially navigated it slightly by privilege that I've been able to select the employer that I work for based on not working in such countries. I also feel that I'm quite visible in my queer identity, certainly online. I know that others that are members of the LGBT community have a less visible profile and have therefore felt comfortable to work in said countries, especially earlier in their career.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's a personal decision. It's personal sort of risk assessment around that as well. And again, there's quite the sort of embassy model, and certainly working in large firms where you're within a confined environment changes the risk picture to around sort of working across rural areas as well in some of those countries. So yeah, I think it's personal sort of experience there. I don't, Poggy, if you've got any.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a similar thing. As I mentioned before, I've worked for three global automation companies who operated in countries where I wouldn't have gone, and in some cases refused to go because of personal safety. Personal safety does need to come first. Um, it's important to try and do as good a job as you can and progress if you want to within work and grow and develop, but only where it's safe to do so. And I mean, I worked predominantly, well, I worked in quite similar industries really to Fiona, but coming from a completely different angle. I concentrated, specialized on mobile machinery, on heavy plant machinery, so very frequently on site with construction, mining, agriculture, those sorts of industries. And as a very visibly queer person, I had my fair share of um, encounters, shall we say. But again, personal safety needs to come first, and this is where my work in engineering, um, in inter engineering, and other DEI within engineering has really given me that fire to try and make a difference, because there have been situations where I've had to walk out, where I've had to leave, where I've had to challenge people, and it's been uncomfortable, and I'm sure that a lot of people wouldn't maybe have been quite as bold as I have decided to be in some situations. That was just a decision that I had to make.
I think as well, it's we all need careers, we all need to pay the mortgages, but for me, it's also ethics. So whilst I might work on certain projects in certain countries, which may not have um, supportive LGBT rights, for example. Maybe I've worked on schemes in Nigeria, but that not traveling there, but they were for community projects. So I think that's quite different to working on schemes where it's directly a capitalist venture for for potentially someone that's benefiting in terms of people that have the mechanism to set the law and to define those rights. So I think, yeah, it depends on the context as well, which in which the project that you're working on. As Poggy said as well, it comes down to personal level of the comfort and safety, especially even in the UK, we can face discrimination daily on sites, and it's how we navigate that as well. Mental and physical safety comes first at all times, really.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. Just conscious of time, um, we're up. That's us out of time. The next um, re-engineering Pride webinar we have is in August, focusing on queer women in engineering. But we have lots of other stuff going on in the meantime, as we mentioned, Birmingham Pride, Pride in London, Boat Tour, etc. But thank you very much for joining, and see you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone.